Corruption has cost the country dearly, both in financial terms and credibility and the moral high ground.
According to Transparency International, South Africa is now 83rd out of 180 states on the Corruption Perception Index, with a score of 41 out of 100.
Corruption is just one of the issues we face in the country today. But can ethical business leadership help heal our divided country?
We speak now to Professor Bonang Mohale, Chancellor at the University of the Free State, also a former President of Business Unity South Africa. Professor Mohale, good afternoon to you. We see all sorts of questions around ethical leadership. We see a demand for ethical leadership from business and from politicians. For you, what does that actually look like? Are there examples you can point to of ethical leadership?
So first, ethics is what you do when nobody is watching. It is not helpful when you are a leader to say, but I've not been found guilty by a court of law. Because by the very definition and nature, the essence of leadership is subjecting yourself to higher forms of standard, of morality, of ethics, of principles. By the time the question is asked, you have already done something wrong. It's about ensuring that the difficult questions are not even asked. The reason why we had this conference in Modderfontein for 2 days, the topic is actually quite telling because it says business in society, because business can't exist outside of society. And we're saying we need to find a way of ensuring that business continues to do well by doing good. That business cannot continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. I think it's best encapsulated by Henry T. Ford when he produced these motor vehicles. And one of the very first utterances was we need to produce a car that our own employees can afford. How many businesses today are producing goods and services that their own employees see only as a mirage? That's why, in conclusion, we said business is not South Africa's second, but our last chance.
Well, I mean, people, including those who are often in the exercise of pushing back, say there's a lot of scrutiny, directed at politicians and generally the public sector, and very little of that. If it wasn't for the Steinhoffs, of this world, we wouldn't have known about the extent of the corruption within the private sector.
You're absolutely right, my dear brother Vuyo, because yes, for every corruptor, there's a corruptee. That we have had monumental business failures throughout the world, for that matter. In this country, we have seen some of them that have wiped off entire family savings. Some people have lost farms in Steinhoff. But a 150-year-old organization, Tonga Hewlett, it's normal. We saw KPMG, we saw McKinsey, we saw Bain and Company, how they actually agitated and orchestrated for state capture. That aside, in fact, we are not doing anything wrong by focusing on government, because the difference is in private business, they need to go to jail, yes, but it's private capital. In government, they are using your and my money. It's public funds. The level of accountability there ought to be higher. Secondly, but remember that in the private sector, at least there are checks and balances. In the public sector, we wrote the constitution of this country for Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela. When we were gifted with a different president, we didn't know how to deal with him because we didn't anticipate that there will be one of our own who steals from us. I think we need to be serious about the fact that 30 years into democracy, poverty still has primarily a black and feminine face. That if we depended only on the system of business, then wealth will be an inevitable outcome of both hard work and enterprise, which then means every woman in Africa should be a dollar billionaire. Why are they not? I think we need to accept that we still need to give a leg up, not just a hand down, so that our people can participate in the economy, not even to reach their fullest potential, just to participate.
One of the things that we've seen over the last sort of 4 years, since the pandemic really, has been the growing role of the private sector in providing services that were before then only for government. So you see the private sector, the role in electricity has never been as big. The private sector's role in things like Transnet is growing, both in the ports and in the railways. And there's an argument against that. And we've seen that in the conversations around the NHI Act, which was signed today by the President. That, for example, in the healthcare sector, private healthcare is accused of being, instead of wanting to treat patients, it wants to make money out of them. So where do we draw the line? I suppose, Professor, what I'm saying is, how can we trust business?
There was never a line in the first place. Apartheid lasted for as long as it did because of the support of the Broederbond. And here I'm talking only about institutionalized apartheid in the 48 years. I don't even include the 98 years of separate development. I don't even include the 370 years of colonialism. The president would never think of appointing a minister of finance without talking to the Broederbond. The question we need to ask is, who is President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa confiding in? Secondly, I think we need to say the role of business has always been to be a trusted advisor. I use that word advisedly, trust. Secondly, to be a partner of choice. Lastly, to make everything possible in its power to ensure that it contributes to a capable state, because it's manifestly in business's interest to deal with a capable state. Lastly, you say NHI, which the president just signed today. First, we need to start by saying, if the NHI is about both universal and equitable access, nobody can argue with that. Especially because 30 years into democracy, we haven't learned that there are 5 countries that used to accept aid, especially from Africa. After 20 years, we're giving aid. But yet, in Africa, after 60 years, not 20 years, African leaders are holding a conference about how to better ask for better forms of aid. They are not giving aid. So the people that we used to blame in 1957, having stolen and pillaged and robbed us of our land and our country, was colonialism, rightly so. But in the last 60 years, the people who have plunged us into the self-perpetuating, vicious cycle of abject poverty have been our very own leaders. Therefore, I don't think the president had a choice but to say 30 years into democracy, our people don't still have access to just basic healthcare, because healthcare continues to fail the poor and the vulnerable. What most people are having a beef with is the timing. Number 2, to say, when you put a plan in place, we can't just depend on the good intent. Let's see how workable it is. Is it feasible? Is it affordable? Have you put a budget together? But lastly, we need to say, now you want another thing to be put into the fold of government when you inherited 734 state-owned enterprises, state-owned companies, and you can't count in one hand those that are still technically viable, including government owning more than 5 banks, by the way, if you include the PIC and the Land Bank and the IDC. And now we say, but you want to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank. How do we trust you? Because of state capture, bribing, stealing, and cheating. Because underlying all of this is the distrust that you have given in to greed.
Before I get to where I wanted to go, I'm just curious. To your very first point, why do you think it's important for us to know who the president confides in?
Because in antiquity, even Eilaleni and in rural areas, Kandla, Mondlo, Langanyanga, and Kukuletu, chiefs still go to the Marula tree, where they get wise counsel from other men. They go home and get even better counsel from their partners. And they come back the next morning, then they make the right decision. It's an acceptance that nobody can be bestowed with singular intelligence to run a complex economy like South Africa in a rapidly globalizing world. We made that mistake when we spoke about the 9 wasted years. It is so complex that you need somebody who understands the difference between income and cash, but you also understand You need somebody who understands the role of the NGOs and the private sector. But you also need somebody who say, how do we fit in like a jigsaw puzzle within the global economy? We call it a political economy because government has a disproportionately large influence. And fortunately, where the government has failed, it has spawned successful private sector, private healthcare, private security, private education for our own children. Now the post office is folding. It will give us something that is much more successful. When we missed an opportunity to say we inherited less than 2 million people who are on social security. There are now 28 million people. And there's the post office in every town. We could have just utilized it to be able to give dignity to our people so that they can reclaim their self-respect and their self-worth, but we allow it to die. Because it's very clear to us that we were so eager to get into political office without thinking deeply and profoundly, what are we going to do with this power to fundamentally change the system of the economy of this country? It's still based on the same system that the British gave to the Nationalist Party. Cheap labor, we determine the price of the gold, and we even have the London Sales Organization based in London to determine the price of diamonds in their land when they've risked it all to go to the belly of the earth to go and fetch. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world because our leaders have demonstrated that pretty much like a dog chasing a car, you have never figured out what would I do if the car stopped. If we don't think for ourselves, we place our future in the hands of others. It is up to us to create our own new world. At the moment, this new world is being dictated by others in different corridors.
Now, to your latter point then, because if I listened carefully, I hope I did, to the President and the Health Minister today, they're saying, look, business unity, of which you are the immediate past president, is raising issues of constitutionality. It is also raising issues of procedure and the like. And from where the government is sitting, they say all of these things are these are smoke screens. You know, they have nothing to do with anything other than this. The private healthcare industry in particular. Essentially being opposed to this bill for what it's going to do to their profits. And yes, there may have been mistakes in the past, we may have dilly-dallied and so on, but now is the time, which then speaks to the issue you're raising of why now.
In fact, you're absolutely correct because you almost quoted verbatim. But you see, as business, we need to ensure that we are not tone deaf because we are too far removed from the needs and the wants of our people. Secondly, as business, we need to accept that business itself needs a serious intervention to steer it back. And what is needed is decisive, incisive leadership, which only business can provide. Therefore, you need to come to the table, not with vested interest. You need to come to the table as business, not say, but what is it that we can take away from the table? We became free. Because all the people that came to CODESA 1 collapsed, CODESA 2, they came prepared to give up something. When I started, I said, is it possible that business can continue to do well by doing good? The two are not mutually exclusive.
Professor Bonang Mohale, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you. Chancellor, of course, of the University of the Free State, and of course, as you know, played an important role in our business sector over many years.